Rabbi Harari, Imam Kifah, Garziano Marshalsi.
Right, you're in the middle.
Thank you. And we're going to start this program like we do all of our Swiss programs with opening prayer. And I'm going to ask the temple president at United Yehuda Beth Shalom, Pinei Shinei, to lead us in prayer.
Thank you. And it is my pleasure to be here. Today, as we gather to learn about the difficult challenges and decisions that each faith makes on the end of life, God, may we be open to others' ideas and beliefs, respectful of our differences, not threatened by them. May we grow an understanding of our own motives, knowing that people often act out of their own fears. May we be a force for replacing fear with insight, helping us all to be patient and kind as we talk and learn. Strength, real strength, can always find compromise. Working together, may we find a common ground, enabling us to move forward with a shared purpose. May we see what is truly important and unites us, focusing on that to banish roadblocks of ego and fear. Today, may we be open to others' ideas and beliefs. May we also be ever grateful for the gift of more time. Choices await our wise use of this precious time. May we ever be grateful for this time and use it well, aware that each new day is a gift to be treasured. Each new experience is an unexpected blessing. May we use this time carefully, wisely, and well, using part of our time to love, laugh, and feel joy. Today, we have new chances to expand our awareness, to grow our spirits in compassion and understanding. Bless this day, this hour, this minute, this moment. We are ever grateful for the gift of more time. Finally, may all of our prayers ascend and peace descend. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny, for the opening prayer. God bless you. Before we start today's program, I think we need to recognize the recent events a few days ago of the passing of Cardinal Francis George. He was a strong interfaith leader. He supported SWIFT. He truly built bridges between the three Abrahamic faiths. Our condolences, prayers, love, and feeling are with you and are with the Catholic faith during this time. A brief moment of silence, please, for Cardinal Francis George. Thank you. SWIFT is a Southwest Interfaith team. My name is Mohammed Nofel, and I am the Muslim co-chair of SWIFT. Can I please get a raise of hands if this is your first SWIFT event? Great. Welcome to you all. SWIFT gathers together the three Abrahamic faiths, Christians, Jews, and Christians. The board members of SWIFT every month come together and we discuss various events. One of the events is our spring forum. We have 2 forums a year. We have 2 dinners a year. We have service projects. We go help build homes with Habitat for Humanity. We go and feed the poor. We work closely with the food bank. So if you are interested in interfaith work, interested in SWIFT, please log on to our website It's swiftinterfaith.org, swiftinterfaith.com, and swiftinterfaith.net. We took it all. We're also on Facebook, as well as have a very, very active email server list. So please make sure to keep your emails with us as events come forward. We send out blast emails so that way you know what's going on. The role of SWIFT is not to debate. The role of SWIFT is not to argue. The role of SWIFT is not to convert others to the other faith. The role of SWIFT is not to figure out who is the best faith. The role of SWIFT is to educate each other. God puts here different colors, different religions for a purpose. So let's move that forward. So thank you all for coming today. I also want to recognize the young men and women that we have here today. It's a blessing that you guys are here with us today. I see individuals from high schools and colleges, from churches, from the mosques. I see familiar faces. So if this is our future, then we have a truly bright future. So thank you guys all for coming here today. I'd like to thank Peace Memorial Church for allowing us to have this program here this afternoon. And for a few words of welcome remarks from Reverend Johnson from Peace Memorial Church.
Good morning. Oh, that's just standard. I'm used to standing up here and saying good morning. Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Reverend Shanna Johnson, and I am the senior pastor here at Peace Memorial Church. And on behalf of our congregation, it is a privilege and honor for you to be here and for us to be able to host this event. As Muhammad was talking about the goals of SWIFT in building bridges of dialogue and joint community service projects, we're doing 2 of those goals today. As you brought in your donations to respond now, that is a joint community service that we are responding to in our community. And today we are building bridges on a topic that really is addressed in all of our faith traditions, the way in which we look at the sacredness of life and how we attend to those end-of-life issues. You know, and as I heard about this topic, I thought, for me personally, as a clergy person, what a wonderful topic to bring forth because it is a part of all of our faith traditions. And as a clergy person who sits with families at the end of the life of a loved one and officiate at many funerals and memorials, this speaks to how our faith traditions deal with how we grieve together, how we look at the sacredness, as we heard in that beautiful prayer today, the sacredness of this life and the gift that we have been given, and also how we experience death and see it as a part of our own spiritual journey. So thank you to SWIFT, thank you to the speakers today, and I know that this will be a blessing for all of us, and it is such an honor and privilege to have you here as guests in our congregation and this afternoon, and we hope that you'll be blessed by this presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Sister Marilyn Reniger, and I'm the Christian co-chair for SWIFT. And I too want to thank you for coming out on this wonderful Sunday afternoon. I know that you'll not be disappointed for spending your time here. This afternoon we're going to hear from 3 speakers on the end-of-life traditions and afterlife beliefs in our faith. First, we'll hear the Christian perspective by Dr. Markeski, followed by Imam Mustafa, and then lastly, Rabbi Harari. There's a 20-minute limit for each speaker, and Ray Bibska is here in the front row. He's our timekeeper, and He'll be watching you. You just have to keep your eye on him. He'll tell you when to wind down, and he'll tell you when it's time to stop.
Stay awake.
There will be people walking around with paper and pencils. When a question comes to your mind, just put your hand up, and somebody will hand you a little piece of paper and pencil. You can write down your question, and then they will also collect your questions afterwards. After the three presentations, there will be a 15-minute break, followed by a question and answer session. We're going to try to keep that to a 15-minute, no longer than 10 to 15-minute break. So you have the opportunity to go out and get a snack at one of the tables. All the tables are going to be the same snack, so you don't have to go around each table and see what you really like. You'll see the same on all the tables. It'll move things faster, and we ask that you be back in here then within 15 minutes. But please, as the signs I think are up by the door, please do not bring food in the sanctuary. We're all in for a good afternoon with our three outstanding speakers, so let us begin. Our first speaker this afternoon is our Christian speaker, Dr. Markeski, Vice President of Mission and Ministry at St. Xavier University on the south side of Chicago. Dr. Markeski is an author, educator, lecturer, and storyteller. He speaks nationally on topics of liturgy and the arts, scripture, and lay ecclesial ministry. He served for 18 years as the Chicago Archdiocesan Director of Lay Ministry Formation. And for 9 years, Dr. Markeski hosted a local cable TV program called The Church, the Cardinal, and You. And he continues to co-host the Archdiocesan morning radio program, Catholic Community of Faith. Welcome, Dr. Markeski.
Thank you for that excellent pronunciation of my name. I just came from an event at St. Xavier where I work, where I offered a new vocation, and I was introduced as Dr. Marchese. So coming here amongst those I do not know and having my name pronounced correctly is quite a blessing. Thank you. Thank you also for the acknowledgement of Cardinal George. As you may have noticed in my introduction, I did have the privilege of working closely with him for 14 years. During 12 of those, I interviewed him regularly on the television program, The Church of Cardinal and You. On Friday, I received a call by ABC Studios to come to the studio for a press conference, which I thought was going to announce that he was going into hospice care. Halfway to the studio, my wife called me to tell me that the news had just announced his death. So it was difficult to deal with the shock of that and suddenly be thrust in front of the cameras. Consequently, I never got back to my office and never took my notes with me what this talk was supposed to be about. So you're going to notice that I'm not covering all the bases that I was supposed to cover. I apologize for that. But I hope what I do have to offer will be of value. The success of Alexander the Great spread the Greek notion of what it means to be human throughout the world. That notion involved a profound dualism in which the soul represented all that was good and true, noble and lasting about the human person, and the body represented all the baser and impermanent aspects of the human being, our ignoble instincts for greed and lust and gluttony. The Greeks believed that death brought about a severance between the body and the soul, with the soul ascending to God and the body rotting in the ground, never to be seen again. The Greeks did embrace the notion of reincarnation, whereby the soul would be united to a new body, but never with the original body with which it began life. Christianity came about and revolutionized Greek understanding by insisting that soul and body comprise one reality that has an eternal destiny. In Christianity, body and soul are essentially interwoven, meant to exist as one throughout all eternity. The Christian view insists that the body and soul cannot essentially be separated, for the two comprise this one whole. The conviction that life continues after death has been shared by the vast majority of mankind throughout all human history. Wherever you find evidence of human presence, you also find evidence of belief in life after death. But what would be the nature of that life after death? The Hebrew Scriptures reveal that belief in afterlife grew gradually, as did understanding of what that life might be. And I leave to Rabbi Harari to possibly explain a little more about that. From Christ, Christians receive the assurance that there will be glory awaiting those who place their trust in him. Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, even if he die, will live forever." So Christianity assures us that there is a life after death, but it doesn't have a clear description of what that life is going to be like. This weekend, as various people commented on the death of Cardinal George, Father Bob Barron, director of Mundelein Seminary, was interviewed, and he mentioned that in his last visit with the Cardinal said that as he approached death, his curiosity was awakened. He said, "I can't wait to see what it's going to be like," referring to being face to face with God. Many of us feel the same, but the stereotypical, cloying, sentimental depictions of eternal happiness atop a marshmallow cloud leave many of us cold. Speaking of that caricature, one writer said, "I think 300 years of that are about as long as I could take. Christians offer me an eternity of frustration." But Christian belief actually states that it's this life that gives us 50, 60, 70, 90 years of frustration. Years won't even be part of that next reality. Time not only won't matter, it won't even exist. As one writer said, eternity is a single moment seized and kept. As I was preparing these remarks, the sublime melody came on my Pandora channel. I stopped writing, allowed myself to kind of be drawn in by that music. I was overcome with peace and a sense of timelessness. Is this what heaven is like? I asked myself. It's true that nothing can give us a clear sense of that mystery that we call eternity. As I listened to that music, I felt, though, that I got a little bit of a taste. Heaven, maybe, is like an endless melody of joy. Or maybe it's like the moment when, after a year of my mother being told that my father was lost and would never return alive from World War II, she heard shouts from her kitchen window announcing that my dad had just walked into the Tuscan village where I was born. And my mother, with that impossible news ringing in her ears, ran down the street from the opposite end of town, and they met in the middle in a scene worthy of any Hollywood movie. And they embraced in a moment whose sheer joy and ecstasy was necessarily time-bound and destined to fade. But imagine if that moment could have been frozen, if that moment could have been seized and kept. Might it have provided at least a simple analogy of what that bliss of heaven will be that awaits us? The joy of heaven is not like the natural happiness we know here. It is a perfect happiness, made unique by the fact that we will stand face to face with God. St. Augustine famously said that God made us for himself, and therefore we are restless until we rest in God. Our earthly lives are marked by a hunger that will never be fully satisfied. Only heaven will satisfy that hunger by giving us union with God. In addition to this vision of the Father's kingdom, Christ also revealed that what awaits us in the next life is determined not by God, but by our choices. Many Christians speak of eternal life in terms of reward and punishment, but those words are both inadequate and misleading because they seem to ascribe all agency to God rather than recognizing that in remarkable humility, God reserves to us the ability to choose or to reject him. God doesn't force his love upon us and therefore leaves us to choose whether we spend eternity in his presence or in profound separation from his divine love. We're not sent to heaven or hell. We buy our own tickets. How do our decisions determine our fate? By disposing us over the decades of our lives to desire oneness with God, or to consistently turn in on ourselves, viewing the self as the only reality that really matters. Consistent choice of self over others will bring us, at the end of life, to a state that makes it impossible to choose the beauty and goodness of God. Imagine someone who has spent a lifetime in the dark, being suddenly thrust into the light. The brilliance of the sun will either shut his eyes or force him to run back into the darkness of the cave. Heaven and hell work the same way. It's not God who determines where we go, saying, you deserve heaven, you don't. It's we who determine our fate. In the same way, not our teachers, that we determine what grade we get in a class. Those who study little or not at all have chosen the grade they get. I'm going to jump ahead here because I think I've made my point. C.S. Lewis said of hell that it's a door that's always locked. I love this quote. Hell has a door that's always locked from the inside. It has a door always locked from the inside. God doesn't send us to hell and lock us in. Rather, we send ourselves to hell and lock out God and others. Besides heaven and hell, Catholic Christianity offers another interim destination called purgatory, which means a place of cleansing. And it's this distinctively Catholic doctrine, sees purgatory as a place where souls suffer, and I put the word suffer in air quotes. They suffer for a time after death on account of their sins, and the suffering is born out of the recognition of the ugliness of sin and of the distortion they have experienced because of it. Some conceive of purgatory as a place of temporary punishment, but punishment is not the point. The Catechism of the Catholic Church states that all who die in God's grace and friendship, but are still imperfectly purified, are assured of eternal salvation. But they undergo purification after death in order to achieve the holiness necessary to enter the joy of heaven. So according to Catholic Christian belief, you either go to hell or you eventually go to heaven. And you can go to heaven one of two ways, directly or through the side route of purgatory. But being in purgatory means you're assured a place in heaven. So purgatory is actually, in many ways, a tender and consoling doctrine that assures us that perfection does not have to be reached only in this life, that we can die a friend of God but still need much purification before we can stand in God's presence. To use a very silly analogy, if you've seen the movie Somewhere Over the Rainbow, what is that? The Wizard of Oz. If you remember, when they get finally to the land of Oz and they have an appointment to see the wizard, what happens to them? They all go to the beauty parlor. And the lion is having his hair curled, and Dorothy's having her nails done, and the scarecrow is being stuffed with fresh straw because they need to be cleansed and purified before they can see the great and powerful Oz. And I think this notion of purgatory sort of is something like that we need to be cleansed of the ugliness of sin, which is this selfishness, this turned in on the self, this putting us ahead of others. We need to be purified of that before we can stand before the goodness and the perfect selflessness that is God. If there is suffering in purgatory, perhaps it's the pain of recognizing our failure to love. Purgatory brings into focus the Catholic notion of the communion of saints. Catholics believe that there are three kinds of believers. There's what we call the church militant. That's us, living here on earth, working, fighting the good fight and running the good race. There's the church triumphant, those who have already reached the glory of the kingdom. And there's the church suffering, or a better term, the church penitent, which would be those 7 minutes who are in purgatory. Every Sunday, Catholics recite the Creed, and as they get to the end of the Creed, one of the items that they profess each week is, I believe in the resurrection of the body. Christians firmly believe that just as Christ is truly risen from the dead and lives forever, so after death, righteous believers will live forever with Christ in their bodies. The term body refers to the human in their state of weakness and mortality. Resurrection of the body means that weak and mortal body will be transformed, just as Christ's body was transformed. Sometimes we get confused between resurrection and resuscitation. In the New Testament, we have examples of both. If you look at the story of Lazarus, his is not a story of resurrection. His is a story of resuscitation. He was dead. Jesus came and called him forth from the tomb, and he came back to life, to his previous mortal, limited life, where he suffered from hunger, where he could suffer from pain, where he could get sick, and where he would eventually die once again and be put back into the tomb. Jesus, however, was raised by God from the dead, and the body that he had was a resurrected body. It was no longer bound by the limits of normal human experience. He could eat, he could be touched, he could show the wounds in his hands, and he could also go through a wall or through a closed door. And he could be here 1 second and many miles away the next. He had a resurrected body that is a very different kind of life experience than what we know and understand. And Christian belief is that all of us, at the end of time, will be reconstituted with those resurrected bodies. That's why, initially, to be, what's the word when they burn your body at the end of your life? Cremated, thank you. I just thanked myself, I think. Cremation was not allowed by the Catholic Church because it was seen as an act of disrespect to the gift of the body. And to willfully take direct action to destroy the human body was understood as sinful. The Church has changed its mind on that particular practice, and Catholics are allowed to be cremated because the belief still persists that even if you were buried 2,000 years ago and your body had turned to dust, that body would have to be somehow miraculously reconstituted by God. And so if a body is destroyed through cremation, God's power is no less to bring that body back to life in that resurrected state that we were talking about. See, I just ad-libbed and jumped ahead of my text here. Okay, one last notion. We talked about heaven and hell, and we talked about how it's not God who makes that decision. There has been, since the beginning of Christianity, this belief that ultimately God will save all people. A universalism, if you will, universal salvation would be made available to all. In one sense, it sort of renders to God that aegis that I was saying before. He has willingly surrendered to us. So it's saying, yeah, God has made us free, but ultimately, you know, God is God, and we will never be able to completely resist the divine love. And God's love will overwhelm us. And eventually, even the fallen angels, even Satan, will be brought back and embraced in God's mercy. Origen, 3rd century theologian, one of the great theologians, proposed that doctrine. It was rejected by the church because it contradicts both the notion of God's justice and that notion of human freedom. More recently, the theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar has proposed a similar but different notion. And he says that we can reasonably hope that all will be saved. So while Origen claimed a doctrine that all would be saved, von Balthasar says we can hope. We can't know, because there is that freedom of will, and there is that justice of God. But we can still hope that somehow, in the great mystery that we call God's love, it might be possible that all will be saved. For me, I remain skeptical about that notion because I do value that concept of human freedom so much. And there's one line from the New Testament that in many ways for me seals the deal. And that's when Jesus says of Judas, better for him if he had never been born. There is no greater evil than non-existence, except to lose your salvation. And so I hear in the words of Jesus that, yes, non-existence would even be better than to lose your eternal soul in eternal damnation. And it seems that that's what he says of Judas. And so while I love the idea of holding on to that hope, that we might all be saved, I think that there is the possibility that some might not. However, the church has never said that there's a single soul in hell, but they have proclaimed that we can be confident that there are many, many in heaven. And I think I'm right on my money. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marquesi. Our next speaker is Imam Mustafa. He is the Imam and Director of the Orland Park Prayer Center. He is the appointed representative for the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Lebanon on behalf of the Lebanese community in the United States. Imam Mustafa serves as the chairman of the Illinois Council of Imams and Scholars. He's also chairman of the Quran Institute of Chicago, the Muslim American Society. He is an experienced public speaker and active participant in interfaith relations. Imam.
Good evening, everyone. And the title that was passed to me, I read two titles. One was about end-of-life traditions, and the second was about afterlife beliefs. So I'll hope to cover both. I'll start with the last one, so we can go into details about the traditions of the end-of-life issues. From an Islamic perspective, the belief in the afterlife came to relate it to the choices that people will make in this life. So one of the main tenets of Islam's faith, there are 6 articles of faith, 5 pillars of practices. The 6 articles of faith included that we believe in God, in His angels, in revelation, in prophets or messengers, in the day of judgment, and in destiny. So believing in the day of judgment was part of our 6 articles of faith. And then if someone believed in such 6 articles, he or she would be asked to do 5 things as a proof. So you declare that you are a Muslim, we call it the testimony or the witness, and then you engage in 5 daily prayers, and then give charity to the poor, fast the month of Ramadan, and then perform pilgrimage. So when it comes about believing in the day of judgment, or the afterlife as it has been mentioned, the first thing is the concept to believe in it. And believing in the day of judgment is meant to relate back to what are your choices now. No laws on earth can really regulate people's actions just because they are laws. You can have as many cameras as you want on people working for you, or you can have as many police officers going out there. But if people without their own conscience acting on that which they believe in, people's relationships will not be regulated. So the concept of believing in the day of judgment came first to regulate people's choices on earth, and then that would be part of the reward of when they land on the truth, that they would be rewarded for that. The truth which is centered on a very simple concept. We are the only type of creation that we were tasked to make choices. And the trust on landing on the truth is that which make an honor of what we believe, that the way God created Adam, it started with honoring him. That we believe God created him with his hands. God breathed the soul into him. God told the angels to bow down in respect to Adam. Adam representing humanity, me and you. And then he taught him the name of things. And one of the things that the first communication happened between God and the last prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon them, was to read. So with the knowledge, it was honored. And then we was taught, the human race, me and you. And then we were tasked between the concept of what is right and what is wrong. And then we were entrusted of all this, what are we going to do on earth in relation to ourselves, how would that reflect on us, in relation with God, and then the most important, how it's going to reflect on people around you. So when we come to the Islamic perspective of understanding these things, and let me just insert one piece before I go to the other points, we have 2 sources of rules that comes either from the Holy Quran, the text, which we believe God spoke it to Angel Gabriel, and Gabriel brought it down into the heart of the Prophet. And then Prophet Muhammad himself was, through his tradition, he exemplified or he lived this text into real life. So anyone studying Islam, learning about his faith, he has to go to the Holy Book, the Holy Quran, and then he needs to study the life of the Prophet. So it will demonstrate the reality of that. So the main focus about the afterlife from the Quran and the tradition of the Prophet was about to believe in the day of judgment and how that would reflect on you of quality life in this life and your choices, and then the concept of rewards that will come after that. The second point, that no one will act on someone else. We don't believe that someone else will save you. You will save yourself. That no actions on behalf of someone will be taken as the actions of someone else, even if it was a prophet, or a messenger, or a holy person, or whatever title it is there. We believe that your actions are solo, and then you report to God solo, and then you will be worthy of whatever the outcome of that on your own. This is a very main concept of that which relates to the afterlife in Islam. And in that perspective, we believe that, relating to the issue of death and the 5 issues, when someone dies in Islam, we have a saying from the Prophet's tradition that says, if someone dies, 3 things will fall into his grave: his family, his money, and his deeds. 2 things will walk away. Your family will walk back home, the money will be distributed, and the only thing that goes down into your grave, which is the second phase, are your own deeds that you make choices. Interestingly, Islam urged us that we can prolong these deeds by making them more of a widespread of how it will relate and affect on the life quality of people around us. So if I'm going to do an act of worship toward God, reading some pages from the Holy Quran tonight, beautiful. I will be rewarded great. But if I choose to go to feed some people who are in need for some food tonight, then I have expanded the span of the reward. It went to another person. And then if I can make it a constant thing, if I can put money in building a hospital or an orphanage or whatever it is, then as long as that place is going, even after I'm dead, it will keep pouring rewards in my book of deeds until the day of judgment will come. So the scope of your own deeds are not limited to that which is of death. You can take it with you after you have finished this life. It can really bring rewards. At the same time, if people started an evil act, that people picked it up and inherited it and practiced it, it might also pour some bad deeds into your book of deeds after you die, so you better watch out. The second point is that no intercessors between us and God. There is a direct relationship. About that, when we die, God honors whomever He wishes. We believe, for example, that I could be entering heaven because the way of I raised my child. I could enter heaven because of the way I treated my neighbor, because that neighbor might make some supplications for me, or even the prophet. So it's not about the holiness of the people. That's a very fine line in Islam. It's not about the prophet making you enter heaven. It's not about your daughter as a person. It's about the action that took between you and them, the value of it, how that will be translated, and this is where it will be also added to that which you can take with you as good deeds at the day of judgment. Now, that which you end your life with, it's about this is what fits your character. There is a verse in the Quran that says, why is it about people being in hell for such long time, or even in heaven for such long time? God said that if such people were brought, if this person who was poor, who had hardship, who barely made it, who was broke, who was homeless, but always was grateful, and then if he was brought into the day of judgment, and then brought back into life and tasked with the same hardships, he will still be a believer. So it becomes part of his character to be grateful to God, regardless of the circumstances around him. And someone who rejected the truth and rejected faith, if he was brought into seeing what's the outcome of these actions, and probably touched with some punishment in that perspective, and would be brought back again into life, he would go back into rejecting God. So the punishment becomes that which matches their own perception about life. And that's where we see God's fairness and that perspective coming down. Now, we believe that humans were created to live forever. But we move from one segment into another. The same way we go tonight and we close our eyes to sleep. If you were in a dark room with no clock around you, then how long you have slept, you have no idea. We measure things in relation to that which is relevant around us. So we have clocks and watches, and that's in relation to the movement of earth and sun. But when it comes to the matter of the soul, of the spirit, time is in a different zone, than that which we are relating to now. So that's why when we talk about the period of, dreams, for example, you feel sometimes they are too long, but then they will tell you it's not more than a few seconds. Or that which people could stay for 2,000 years in a grave, to God it might be just a few seconds. And it is about your relativity to that which you are connecting yourself to. We believe that regardless of when someone dies, if there was a miscarriage, or someone was dead at birth, or someone lived for 10 years or 100 years, to us we relate it to that which is around us. But to God, it's just the soul that He brought life into it and then He took it back away. Because in the Holy Quran we read that one day by God's time is equivalent to almost 50,000 years of our own time. So relativity to that, we believe that it is a matter of a true investment, that what you can provide in good deeds, very limited, the reward is really more like a gift from God. We are not really presenting a true price for heaven. It is even that which we engage in good deeds, they are gift from God. I'm not able to be grateful to Him unless He grants me to be able to be grateful to Him. So even that initiative by itself is a gift from God. So this is just a small, understanding of the concept of afterlife in Islam. But I really wanted to bring to you the traditions of end-of-life issues. And let me start by the matter of illness. Illness is looked from an Islamic perspective as something might be of a test, of a trial, but that you need to look at it as also something good that can either bring you closer to God. So when you are in good health and you're studying these references in the Holy Quran and in the tradition of the Prophet, and you understand that if God decides to test you with something, it's about bringing the good out from you. If God wants to bring you up in heaven on a level 10, for example, and you're fine with level 1, but you're not doing anything more to go upgrade, so probably a test will be brought to your door. Then you'll be more closer, then your prayers will be more focused, then your supplications will be more, dear and more focused in that perspective. So we always look at illness as something that could be of a good outcome from it. And this is where we need to focus on the positive note when we are dealing with people who are sick. There's a very direct tradition, a statement by the Prophet that he said, if you enter by the sick, prolong life for him. Even it might not change what has been destined, but it makes him feel good. So even if that person is going to die, at least let him die on a positive note, feeling good. And it is the best way to feel safe with God. We read also in the tradition of the Prophet that when the angel of death came to visit Abraham, and it's time for him, to join his Lord in death. So Abraham said, why would the beloved take the soul of the one he loves? So God told Abraham, and why would the beloved not be anxious to meet the one he loves? It's time for you to join me back where you're supposed to be. So you really need to see yourself, where are you at? Me being late 40s, closer to 50, when I was younger, I never thought of looking at death on a personal level. Now, both of my parents are dead. My grandparents are dead. A lot of friends. So really, I look at it as, okay, I'm meeting someone that I even knew in this life. So it's about a faith perception that takes you about meeting those that you love, meeting those that have been there for you if they were humans, or the one that you owe them all that which you are in, being close to your God, being next to Him. And even the last moments of the Prophet, we believe in an Islamic tradition that no Prophet will be brought into death until he is being asked, would you like to stay in life or would you like to join the Lord? So the last moments that were for the Prophet, peace be upon him, Muhammad, he said, I want to join my Lord. It's about seeing yourself closer to the most beloved, the one that created you, the one that you owe him life. When it comes to sickness, there are certain, practices and manners that we keep. Never stay long by a person who is ill or who is sick. Always speak good words. Ask him to make supplications for you. You're going to make supplications for him, but ask him, because in that moment of vulnerability, we believe that he is more being answered by God than you making supplications for your own self. So this is something that even when someone is in bed, sick, he feels that he can contribute something to those people who are outside. It's all about positive approach from an Islamic perspective. We believe that people should sit down and read passages of the Holy Quran, speak the word of Al-Kalima, the word of truth. We believe that there is no God, but God is the true word of truth, that it is testimony of the entity of God being one, being worshipped alone. We believe that there are certain manners directing him to the direction of Mecca, which is northeast, living in the U.S., covering him in a way that gives respect, closing the eyes at the time of death, allowing people to express their feelings. In Islam, it is not prohibited for people to shed tears or to show their emotions. The Prophet himself, when he lost his son, he had a son called Abraham, he cried, and his companions felt that if you are the messenger, you should be on the highest level of faith, like your heart should be strong, solid, you should have no emotions. But then he cried and he said, our heart will feel sorrow, and we are in a status of sadness, and for the loss of Abraham, we are in this type of feeling. So it does not contradict to accept God's destiny for someone to die at a certain time, and between you expressing your feelings or emotions. What was asked not to be practiced is to say words that reflect that you reject God's destiny and that you don't accept that which God had brought to you. Now, when it comes to the burial itself, we do prepare people for burial. It is about giving them actually a wash. Everybody should be given a wash, and everybody should be covered with, we don't dress them like regular clothes. We just bring a white cloth, made of fabric, and we cover the body, and then we perform prayer on that body itself. The prayer itself is just standing up with the, coffin in front of you, and it does not include bowing down or prostrating like a regular normal prayer we would do. So people will not perceive as if we are praying to that individual. And it is just including the opening chapter of the Holy Quran, which is to God. The second part of it is about making peace and blessings on the Prophet and Messenger, recognizing his role in that which he brought, and then making supplications for the person who died himself, and finally making supplications to yourself. The body then will be taken to the grave, and then it will be lowered. Usually, we go by the codes in the US here, whatever, state codes, or even sometimes local cemetery codes. But in an Islamic tradition, it is meant to be very simple. You dig the grave in an L shape down, you bring them down, and then you put them on the side, and then you cover next to them. We believe that the body started from clay, it has to be brought back into clay. So the honor of honoring someone dead is to bring the body into that which they belong to. When it comes to the issue of condolences, it's about making words of supplications for the family. Among the very famous ones that the Prophet chose to say were, to God belongs that which he gave, and to God belongs that which he took back. And we say nothing but that which God is pleased with. So bottom line, you are just recognizing that this whole gift of self is from God. And you are entrusted to carry this soul and this body. This is the time when God decided that he will go back to him. The body is brought from the matter that was made from, soil or clay, and the place of spirit is in the place of the unknown. We have general references, we don't have details of where it settles. It is all in the world of unknown. We know that it will be in safe hands next to God. Let me finish by saying that the traditions in relation to end of life is all about honoring the person himself. It's about what you can see as a person able to deliver to people around you and to yourself on the concept of connecting that to belief in God. God is the creator, and God is the one who honored. Then we need to keep this honor in all the phases that kept, through the tradition of the Prophet. We don't initiate practices on our own. When it comes to rituals of acts of worship, we just go exactly as the Prophet performed it. We don't have authority to make any changes in that. The only way we believe we honor someone's death is to honor him in the way that the Prophet showed us how to do it, and that's the task that everyone who is dead is to be honored in this way, to honor him, referring him to his Prophet, to his Lord. I hope that you have had an idea of how we do things on both ways, and an ideology and in practices, and maybe in question and answer will shed more light on that. Thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you, Imam Mustafa. I wanted to remind you before I meant to, there's young men going up and down the aisles with pieces of paper. If you have any questions, please write them down. Or if you want further explanation on any point, please write out your questions, and they'll be happy to pick them up for you. Our third speaker is Rabbi Harari. She was born in Israel and was raised both in Israel and in the United States. She then worked for the Foundation for Jewish Campus Life at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee and at the American Hebrew Academy Jewish Boarding High School in Greensboro, North Carolina, before pursuing rabbinical studies. After ordination, Rabbi Harari served a pulpit in Western Canada and then returned to the States, where she currently serves as rabbi at B'nai Yehuda Beth Shalom and Congregation Eskad in Homewood. Did I pronounce that right? Rabbi.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you this afternoon. I think you will note that there are some similarities in some of what I will share, which I think you will hear both in some elements of the Muslim tradition as well as the Christian tradition. I will share with you a little bit this afternoon about the Jewish tradition, and I'm going to start from death and move onward from there. Wanted to start by beginning and sharing with you that death is considered to be a natural part of the cycle of life in the Jewish tradition. Jewish law, however, halakha, as it is called in Hebrew, has a definition of death, and it suggests that the heart being still as a stone is what is defined as death. In a situation where someone, God forbid, is in a terrible accident and finds themselves in a situation medically defined as brain death, for example, that is an area that becomes a bit more confusing because there are differing opinions amongst legal authorities in the Jewish tradition as to whether that constitutes death or not. However, if an individual is sick, it is up to us to help keep an individual comfortable. Our tradition is very clear in saying that we are not allowed to hasten death in any way, so that something such as would be considered euthanasia is not allowed in the Jewish tradition. As death nears, as it becomes more imminent, while we sit at the bedside of someone, potentially in a hospital or in a hospice setting, it's traditional we might recite the words of the Psalms. Psalms being the book of Psalms, and consider texts that are both texts recited at wonderful times, times of great joy, as well as times of great difficulty. And many of the songs have themes which ask for God's assistance and strength, asking God to help us and to be our guide in these difficult times. So it's typical that we might recite some of these songs as we struggle with a loved one or anybody's failing health. But as death becomes imminent, it's traditional that we would recite what is called in Hebrew a vidui. Vidui is a confessional, and in this case it is a deathbed confessional. If the individual is cognizant and able to speak on their own, they may read the confessional themselves. Otherwise, typically a family member or a clergy member, a rabbi, a cantor, would come and read that text on their behalf. And that text simply comes to say, God, please forgive any wrongdoing that I have done in my life, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Once we have found ourselves in a position where someone has passed away, our tradition teaches that we don't leave that individual alone. In part, this is so that the person who is now in a state that is somewhat understood to be, and again, opinions differ even within the Jewish tradition exactly as to how this works, but the person is sort of in a transitionary period. There is a sense that they are not fully at rest until we have put that person has been buried, until we have laid this person to rest. And as a result, so that the person is not afraid, both while they are ill as well as preparation for a funeral in the time that it would take from death on, that person is never left alone. This would include in a hospital, a home, wherever the individual was once they have passed away, and then accompanying the person until the funeral home, where a group called the Chevra Kadisha, this is an Aramaic word, Aramaic being a sister language to Hebrew, and it literally translates as Holy Society, which, as you may surmise, is actually a euphemism. We often speak, ironically in a way, in euphemisms surrounding death, despite the fact that it is a natural part of life, going so far as to call our cemetery a Beit Chaim, a house of life. Chevra Kadisha means a holy society, and these are individuals who, by volunteer only, they are never paid, they are all volunteers, and their job is to help prepare a body for burial. It's our responsibility. It is considered an obligation of every individual to help to prepare a loved one, to bury them. It is our obligation to see that this person is buried, and as a result, while this organization may help with the preparation of the body, you will see in a moment when we come to the burial itself that in fact we take part in that action as well, symbolizing our fulfillment of that obligation. By way of preparation, first and foremost I should take a step back and say that it is considered most respectful to the deceased to be buried as quickly as possible. That means that in the Jewish tradition, if you are in a particularly observant community, a funeral could happen within less than 24 hours. In our day and age, because we believe that the funeral service itself is for the living, what would happen is that oftentimes funerals will take place within a day or two or three of a passing, simply to allow time for relatives and loved ones to arrive and be able to take part in the service. As was mentioned previously, Jewish tradition also does not allow cremation. This is something that is important to us because, as it relates to both the second part of our question with regard to the afterlife, yes, Judaism does have a sense of an afterlife and of a resurrection, and that resurrection comes primarily in the form of an understanding of the Messianic era. In the Jewish tradition, the Messiah has not yet come. The Messiah who is a person, and when that person comes, revealed to us at a later time and heralded by Elijah the prophet, who is understood not to have died, but gone up to heaven or into the heavens, I should say, in a chariot of fire. This is considered to be a time that will be utopic. The temple in Jerusalem is understood to be rebuilt. We would return to sacrifice and to worship in the temple as is taught to us in the Torah. And at that point, life will become beautiful. There will be no more war. There will be no more hunger, no more poverty. All of the world's ills will be gone. And as such, the individuals who've passed away are also understood to then be able to be resurrected and brought back to life to work and serve God in the temple as any of us might in our own physical abilities, just as we are living. This becomes important in the sense that if one were to be cremated, that would not be possible. So cremation is not permitted according to Jewish law. Additionally, we also believe, as I believe my colleague, the Imam, mentioned, that we also understand that we come from dust and we return to dust. Cremation does not, in fact, give us the same dust. And so we return to the earth just as we came from. Lastly, I will mention that if you ever have surgery, particularly in the state of Israel, if you ever lose a limb, God forbid, or have an appendix or any other organ removed, it is customary to give that organ back to you or that limb back to you in such a way that it can be preserved. And traditional Jews will be buried with those limbs and organs. For many years, excuse me, it was not permitted to donate organs in the Orthodox Jewish tradition. That has since changed because one of the most important Jewish concepts is the idea of preserving a life and saving a life. And that concept has overridden all of that. So even today, even Orthodox Jews, certainly Jews of conservative and Reformed traditions, absolutely believe in and do offer organ donation and do take part in that. Once a body is prepared, that means that it's been ritually washed and that it is placed in a shroud. We understand that we're all equal in birth and we are all then equal in death. We come into the world with nothing and we leave with nothing. So a person is placed into the same kind of shroud, whether you're a man or a woman, a billionaire or somebody who's been homeless for 45 years. Placed into the casket along with the individual is a packet of earth that comes from Israel. And this packet here, and what I will do is I will leave these things up here maybe during the break if anyone wants to take a look at them. You can see that it says here, Holy Earth from the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, Israel. This earth will be placed inside with everybody who is being buried. This is linking that individual to their destiny and their homeland. Israel being the spiritual homeland of all Jews. In addition, the casket itself is traditionally pure wood, typically pine, no metal of any kind, everything that we can do not to hasten its return into the earth. So that is something that would happen with burial. The funeral service itself begins with a ritual called Kriyah. Kriyah in Hebrew means rending or tearing. And this has traditionally been done with garments, whether you wear a shirt, a tie, or some other clothing. And if this is your parent that has passed away, over your heart, you would tear the garment. And if this is your child, God forbid, your sibling, or your, I have to go backwards here, mother, father, sister, brother, son, daughter, and I'm forgetting one. I'm sorry, or your spouse. Thank you. So if it is a parent that has passed away, you would wear the ribbon. In this case, this is a ribbon that is done for the same purpose of rending. It's torn by hand, and it will be worn on the right side for any one of those other relatives. Those are the relatives that are the second closest, and those are the ones we are required or obligated by Jewish law to mourn for. We would recite the words, which we also recite upon hearing upon a death, and the words are Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, blessed be the judge of truth. And throughout, we will recognize what is also very similar to what we heard again in Islam, Adonai Natan v'Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach, which means God gives, God takes away. Blessed be the name of God. So we recognize that God has the power over our lives. We are but human beings, and we recognize and accept, sometimes very bitterly, but we recognize that this is not in our hands. Continuing on here, I apologize. Our funeral services are typically very short, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes shorter. We begin with that ritual of Kriyah for those who are obligated by mourning. We recite some psalms, again for the same messages we talked about before. We include occasional English readings, sometimes poems or the like that may be appropriate to the individual. Words of eulogy are offered, and at that time we hope that we remember what was good about an individual. And then we offer a prayer called El Malei Lachamim, which means God full of compassion, as we ask for compassion upon the individual's soul. Then we walk to, or travel to the cemetery, to the gravesite. Sometimes a full service would take place at a gravesite. If it takes place at a funeral home, we follow in a procession typically. When we arrive, we do two symbolic things which show that we are not eager to participate in the obligation of burying our loved one. One is that as we walk from the hearse following the casket to the grave site, we would pause 7 times, 7 being a number of holistic completeness, and we acknowledge this is something that we do, but we do so with a heavy heart. The other is that once we arrive and the casket is lowered, as I mentioned, we have an obligation to participate in the burial or to bury our loved ones. So what we would do is we would take scoops of earth and place them in the grave, filling in the grave, most often symbolically placing 1 or 2 or 3 scoops. And if we want to show that hesitance, we would take the back of the shovel and attempt to put a few scoops of earth in the back of the shovel, which is more difficult to do, before placing a full scoop of earth. Again, not eager to perform that commandment or that obligation. For us, that becomes then very much an important element of participation. Some families have a tradition, some people, although most in this day and age I'm not sure do, to fill in the entire grave. Once the grave has been filled, whether symbolically or fully, we recite a prayer for the first time, and that prayer is recited by the mourners, the people obligated by mourning, who would say the words of what's called the mourner's Kaddish. Again, death is not mentioned in the prayer. The prayer is simply a prayer that praises God. We take that prayer and we continue to recite it as mourners every day for the first 11 months of mourning. This is a period of time, one of 3 levels of time that we can see set up by the rabbis. And the first thing that would happen is that they also then enter into a period called Shiva. And we pronounce it in the Hebrew Shiva, which means 7. This is the first 7 days of mourning, and these are considered to be the most intense period of mourning. Individuals would return home. There's a tradition of washing hands, no blessing, when we enter the home. Cemeteries are considered to connect to ritual impurity, and so we wash our hands symbolically when we leave them or when we are about to enter the home. The family has a meal of condolence. That meal typically consists, amongst other things, of an egg, which its shape is symbolic of the cycle of life. Following that, they will sit at home. Traditionally, mirrors are covered. We aren't concerned with our appearance. They would wear the ribbon or the rent garment. They would sit on lower stools or take cushions off the couch, maybe even sit on the floor in symbolism of their mourning. And during that week, nothing is important for them other than the mourning. People come to them, people bring food, and gather once an evening for the first 7 days, with the exception of the Sabbath, on which mourning is not permitted. And then we offer a prayer service allowing them to recite the words of that prayer of the Kaddish. Within the first 30 days of mourning, it's the next level of grief. Although after the 7 days are over, people begin to enter into life again, to go to work and to take part. Throughout the 30 days and then throughout the first 11 months, and really the first year after the loss of a loved one, individuals do not traditionally take part in life-affirming, frivolous or joyful types of things. If you're invited to a wedding, you would go to the service. You would not take part in the party that would take place afterward. You typically avoid live music. You simply show symbolically that you are still in mourning. Following all of this, when at the end of that 7-day period, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, this is a candle that is lit at the very beginning of the 7 days when you come home from the cemetery following burial. It's called the Shiva candle. It will last for 7 days. Then, on the anniversary of one's death, each year, first at the first anniversary at 12 months, and thereupon every year, we mark what is called in Yiddish the Yahrzeit. It's the anniversary of a death. There's a verse, I believe it comes either from Proverbs or from Psalms, that says that Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam, the light of God is the soul of man. And so therefore, we have the idea that we light a candle and light becomes associated with memory. This candle burns for 24 hours. Very, very briefly, my last minute, I will just share with you, as you see, we were very clearly regimented with regard to mourning. These all came from the rabbis following the destruction of the temple of just about 2,000 years ago. Regarding the afterlife, Judaism focuses on the here and now. And truth be told, even I, who went to rabbinical school, did not know much about the afterlife before I started to research it for here. Wonderful things for me. News is that somebody decided to write a book. What happens after I die? It's very helpful. I looked at a number of sources and discovered that, in fact, in biblical times, you may have heard of Sheol, it was neutral, it developed over time. At the end of the day, there is an idea, as I mentioned, of resurrection, but at the bottom line is there is no dominant view of what happens after we die, and very little focus is placed on it. We focus primarily on what we do in this life, and we do what we can for our loved ones with the hope that they will have a good destiny. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. It's time for our break. Again, if you have any questions, hopefully you have handed them in, or written them out, handed them to someone in the aisle, or on your way out, hand them to someone in the aisle. Please be here by 4:30, if you possibly can. 4:30. Okay, thank you.
Answer session. First and foremost, thank you all for being here. Thank you for Respond Now. They're wanting to thank you for coming out and also donating. We have our representative, Stephanie Dowell, who's here. If you feel free to talk with her afterwards, donate even more. There's always things that they are needing. Also, I wanted to announce that we have a new website. It's been totally redesigned. It's a homepage, I believe. I cannot see the screen. It's on home pages right now. Has a calendar on there. It has different information that you can actually join on every page where the email is. You can click on it, you can email. There's another page that we have the history page of it. It's really a really nice looking history page. Also on there we're going to be adding some more things. Hopefully it's a YouTube channel where you can see some of the things that we're doing and so on. Other events may be coming out also. We'll be posted to the website. We also want to very quickly announce that we have, this was like a youth, we were trying to get a lot of youth in here. We did have more youth from a lot of the MSAs and Muslim Student Associations, from other mosques and so on. Some of them had to leave due to school studies and so on. But we also have a pretty large group, and I want them to stand. St. John the Evangelist Episcopal Church from Lockport, stand. You guys deserve it. There's a whole youth group here. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for the youth advisor also. Youth, before you leave, we have a survey I would like for you to sign out. Go ahead and fill out and sign. It's really important. Without interfaith and it keep going, we're going to be at a loss. We need to learn to understand one another. So this is really important to us. It's close to my heart. So now I guess we're ready for the questions and answers. So I think it's Ray.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Dowell. I work at Respond Now. So I'd like to thank you all for inviting us here today, and also thank you for the wonderful donations of the diapers. We have many clients that are in need of diapers for their children, and we appreciate your donations greatly. For those of you that don't know about Respond Now, we're a social service nonprofit agency in Chicago Heights. We serve about 22 communities in the south suburbs. We basically focus on hunger, housing, and health through various programs. For hunger, we have a food pantry. We also have a community garden that we run, And, excuse me, our housing programs include rapid rehousing for the homeless, and we have housing counselors that work with clients to negotiate with their banks to make their mortgages more affordable. Excuse me. Our health focus includes prescription assistance and help with health insurance, which is where my role as an in-person counselor comes in. I help people sign up for the Affordable Care Act and also for Medicaid, which people can apply for year-round. So that's what I focus on. I have a little more information out in the lobby if anybody is interested, more information in general about Respond Now, as well as the insurance work that I do. So with that, I'd also like to just point out we have a couple of fundraisers coming up. We have a 5K Run for Hunger in September. There's information about that also, and we have a fundraiser at Bottoms Up Bar and Grill in Lansing, May 16th. So again, thank you very much for having us, and thank you again for your donations. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
This will begin our question and answer period. There's been many questions. We probably will not be able to get to all of them, but we will certainly try. We've combined some of the questions, if possible, so that maybe yours is mixed in with another question. The other thing is, normally we would take further questions during the time period, but at this point, we have so many that we're not going to take any further questions. So, a second to kind of get these in order here. And again, great questions. Great questions. And we have about 20-25 minutes, so we'll see what we can get in here. This is for Imam Mustafa. Why is the grave L-shaped?
Okay, this is the tradition that was picked up from the prophets at their time. It's so you won't throw the soil or the dust on the body itself. So when you go down and then you go in the L shape, you just put the body, you know, on the part which is like the tongue of the L, if you want to say, and then you put the dust next to it. So it's not like throwing the soil on the body itself. So just cover it, and then actually when you put the body, it should be tilted to the right side. And then, let us say if this is northeast, right? This is northeast. So a body should be on the right side like that. It's just like as if when we stand for prayer, we are facing northeast. So we just tilt the body like that. If I'm sleeping, it has to be this way. So my face, my chest, all my body is facing the center toward the Kaaba, which is in Mecca. Simply so the body will not be thrown like, dirt on it. That's fine.
Thank you. Our next question will go to our Christian speaker, Dr. Markeski. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here. One is, please describe the anointing of the sick, and that would be what involves the last rites. And is Catholic different from Protestant as far as these rites might go, or if they're used in both cases?
The anointing of the sick is one of the 7 sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church, and it comes from the letter of James, where he says, if one among you is sick, call out the elders and let him or her be anointed. So it does involve an anointing with oil and the prayers of those gathered, as well as the prayers of the church. So the purpose of the sacrament is for healing, but oftentimes the sacrament is experienced in those final moments before death, where healing is not really an expectation, and then it becomes a way of preparing the individual, preparing the soul for death. And so typically it involves, in addition to the sacrament of anointing, it involves the sacrament of reconciliation, so that the person will confess to the priest. That's why the sacrament of anointing is done only by an ordained clergyman, a priest in the Catholic rite, because it will probably involve reconciliation. And in terms of Catholic and Protestant, that is a Catholic sacrament. I'm not aware that Protestantism utilizes what we would call the anointing of the sick. Certainly, Protestant Christians would pray for the sick and expect God to hear and to bring healing, if that be God's will, but not through that formal signs and symbols, which are much more distinctively Roman Catholic.
Thank you. Yeah, just one second. Sure.
Something to make you smile. So, I came from overseas. I was 18 years old from Lebanon, so I decided to go get my CPE training, the chaplaincy. So the first day I was assigned to the hospital, someone of the Catholic, tradition died. She was an old woman, and the only person who there was her elderly husband. It seems he was pretty old. So it was a Sunday, and the code is that to contact the father for the services. So the husband comes and say, "No, you read her rights, the last rights." Now I used to watch a lot of movies overseas, Hollywood. So the first thing that came to my mind, okay, am I supposed to say you have the right to remain silent? So I was saved by the head nurse. That she came and said, "Imam, you don't have to deal with that. I'll take it from you."
That's wonderful. You have the right to go to heaven.
Thank you for sharing that. Our next question is for Rabbi Harari, and the question was, why is the earth placed in the casket specifically from the Mount of Olives? Is there any specific reason for that?
As is the case, I think, for all three of our faiths, Jerusalem is considered to be a holy city. Mount of Olives is in the Old City, and it is right next door to where the temple stood in Jerusalem. Many people consider that to be a very holy place to be buried, and so the Mount of Olives is a place where we would want to have that earth and be as close as we can to the site where the temple stood, which is today where Al-Aqsa Mosque stands.
This will be a question for all three of our speakers. Does the soul have the same meaning for different beliefs?
I may need a little elaboration of that question.
It's basically, I think what they're wondering is, what are the reflections or thoughts or beliefs in each individual religion as to, is there a soul, and, I think that's what they're getting at, is what are the views of each religion? Is there any difference in what you think about as the human soul, or?
Okay, wow. That's a great question, and I think I'm going to answer it quite simply, that in the Jewish tradition, body and soul are one. But there's, I guess, an understanding that the body is a physical sort of a vessel, in a way, because ultimately that body does return to the earth from which it came. So, as I mentioned, when someone is nearing death and then ultimately passes away, we do have that transitionary period where ultimately there is a sense, and I'm not 100% sure,
you know how many books we all read, and I may have accidentally made this up along the way, so I apologize if it's not exactly accurate. But I believe that there's a sense that the soul does end up leaving the body once someone is once the body is no longer able to sustain it. But that would happen only after burial, and other than that, body and soul are one.
I think Christian belief basically would assert the same. I think everyone understands that there's a spiritual reality after life, and that's what we would typically call the soul. What Christianity asserts is that the body participates in that reality. Although the spirit begins to participate, the soul begins to participate immediately. So right after death, the soul in Catholic experiences what's called the particular judgment, the individual judgment of that individual soul to either experience eternal bliss with God, or be sent to the period of purgation in purgatory, or to be separated from God by that soul's own choosing. However, we also believe that ultimately, when Christ returns in glory, there will be the universal judgment of all human beings, and that at that time, all human beings will be united with their bodies. So the soul and the body will once again experience that oneness that the rabbi was just speaking of. But the soul is that part of us that is eternal, and that most participates in the fullness of presence with the Lord. And then our body is integrated into that fullness at the resurrection of the dead, at the final judgment.
We read in our holy book a couple references I'm going to share with you. In both terms, one spoke about the angel coming to Virgin Mary and telling her that she would be pregnant with Jesus. And then he breathed the soul, Jesus, into Mary's body. We believe that angels are made of light. So between breathing and light, try to figure that out. So it's kind of outside of realm to compare something that we have no tools to measure it with, in that perspective. The second part also, that when God created Adam, God said that the body was made first from the clay, and then God said, I'm going to breathe the soul into you. And that's when we believe, he sneezed. The first thing Adam did after he was created is that he sneezed. And from that, we believe when someone sneezes, it's like he is revived somehow. And that's what we make a supplication for someone who sneezes. We tell them, God mercy be upon you. Now, we can imagine only things in relation to time and space. And I think one of the wisdom why it was meant to be part of the unknown, although it is in time and space, literally what we are living in, it is to bring humility to the level of the person who would not succeed and claim himself of all knowledge, of all arrogance and knowing everything around. Humans tend to claim they know everything. So God is challenging us daily that if you want to get to know me, and I am beyond your encompass to be able to be seen or touched or like through your senses, reflect on that which I created, but as an entity to be measured by time and place, God is beyond that really. And the relevance between understanding that about God is to look at ourselves. So you have something that is carried with you that cannot be measured with time, that cannot be measured with space. Yet it exists, and you are a true proof of that. So we focus on the lesson learned from this entity of spirit that you cannot measure with your senses, but rather you know it exists, and it is the process of breathing, if it was from God or the angel by the will of God, and that which means to be tasked with the body is just a carrier. It doesn't matter if someone lost all his limbs, he would still be that individual. So even like 1/3 or half of your body is gone, but you're still identified as that person. So it's not about tall or short, how overweight or skinny, what's your color of your skin. It's about your soul, what values you carry. And let me finish with this. When we refer to God, we don't refer to an entity of physical reference. We refer to attributes and names. These attributes and names, the all wisdom, the all powerful, the all seeing, the all hearing, we are to act on such attributes and manners and values and ethics that dictate our life. So the soul becomes the relationship and the names and attributes of God of how it dictates our choices in life.
Thank you. This might be kind of a follow-up question for Dr. Marcheski, since we were talking about the soul in the Christian view, afterlife. On the cross, Jesus said to the thief, "Today you will be in paradise with me." Any comment on the focus of today? Is there no wait for the soul to go to heaven? Is it immediate?
Is there no wait? Is that the question?
That's basically what the question was. Jesus said, "Today you will be with me in heaven."
Yeah, that's kind of a significant text, because it does indicate that heaven can be an immediate experience. So it's not just something that we anticipate after the second coming of Christ. It's something that a soul can experience immediately after death. In the case of the so-called good thief who was hanging beside Jesus, the privilege of going directly to paradise was given to him precisely because of his attitude toward Christ, in recognizing him, in professing his faith in him, and asking him to be remembered. You recall that before Jesus said that to him, "Today you will be with me in paradise," the good thief said to Jesus, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And so he was immediately promised that privilege of oneness with God immediately after his death. For many of us, I'd say, for most of us, I take great comfort in the Catholic belief in purgatory, because I'm not so sure I'm going to be ready to stand before the glory of the Lord immediately, but if I can get in the door through purgatory, keep me there as long as I need, Lord, because, there's lots of days, I tell you, I have lots of days where I go, yeah, I'm going to need some purgatory for that, because there's just sometimes I'm angry or I'm resentful, and I say, that's not what God wants of me. I said, Lord, cleanse that from my heart. And I think, I don't know if it's all going to go in this life, but I think I might need some purgatory for that.
Thank you. Again, since we're talking about the soul and afterlife, and this is something we're all going to face, what is this is for all three speakers, what is the concept of the Day of Judgment in all three faiths?
So I'm going to take a step back and say that, generally speaking, I mentioned Jewishly that when we hear about a death, as well as when we rend our garment or a ribbon, which I don't know if I mentioned, it's a symbolic of the tear that's left in our hearts at this loss. We recite the words, "Baruch Dayan Ha'emet," blessed is the judge of truth. So as I mentioned, and I think this was the case as well in Islam, that we share this idea that God is all-powerful, and God is in control of what happens. There is an idea of sort of divine justice, a day of justice that comes about, and this is something that comes through Jewishly in the Mishnah and the Talmud. The Mishnah being a commentary on the Torah, which is sealed approximately 200 CE, so approximately 1800 years ago, and the Talmud, written in Babylonia in exile and sealed about 500 CE, so approximately 1500 years ago, do have an idea of a place called Olam Haba. Olam is the Hebrew word for world, Haba meaning to come. We are here, Olam Hazeh, in this world. There is a world to come, and the Mishnah and the Talmud did understand that as a place where divine justice is meted out. But this is also, again, sort of one place out of many. So the Mishnah and the Talmud do mention it. there is that sense, but it is one of a number of different understandings that have developed over the course of time, and as I mentioned, no one is dominant. So,
Very brief. We believe that from Jerusalem, the end of times, earth will change. It will become flat. And that rain will come. And it will mix with the soil, and all bodies will come back, resurrected, dead again, not alive. And the same age that people died at. So if you died at 80 or 10, bodies will come exactly as the time they departed from this world. Then we believe God will order one of his angels called Israfil, that he will blow an horn. Some weak narratives talk about that the residence of souls are in that horn, like every soul has a place in that thing, in that horn. And then when he blows in it, the souls will depart that horn and it will join the bodies. And then everyone will stand for God for trial. So there will be a place where people will be gathered, and there will be a scale that will weigh your good deeds versus your bad deeds, and God is the judge. God the creator, God the one who knows if you have done a mistake because of pressure or vulnerability or weakness, that he knows how to deal with it, or if you were arrogant and challenging God in all levels. Sins in Islam are in categories. So a Muslim, even believing in God and in the Holy Quran and Muhammad, might go even to hell to be punished for certain things if he did die without repentance. If I had killed someone without repenting after I made a mistake, or if I had raped someone, or if I had done anything that harmed someone else without repentance, that's translated into some time served and some sort of punishment at the day of judgment. The worst sin a person can do towards God is to reject him, or to, associate and worship someone else with him. So it varies between, being whatever, 1 second, or whatever after that, eternity in hell or hell. The same thing for heaven. It is the people who would be rewarded in that which they have done. It's about the conscience behind the actions. It's not about the deeds and numbers. Numbers sometimes matter, but it is the conscience behind things, in evil or in good deeds, the intentions behind that which you do. So we do believe in I don't want to say like a physical in relation to what we are physically experiencing now, but it is in real. It's not just like like hallucinating or some, thinking like dreaming like that. It is real. There is real heaven. There is real hell. There is a scale. People will be tried and then will be, entered into whatever God decides for them.
There are a couple of dimensions to the Christian understanding of the Last Judgment. In terms of the physicality, I don't think Christianity really has a position on what we're going to look like after the resurrection of the dead, whether we're going to be young or old or the age that we're. Those who've had near-death experiences seem to report seeing those who have gone before them, usually as young people. So they see their grandparents, but they're young grandparents. So I think the sense is that the resurrected body is a healthy, wholesome, ideal body. So whatever would be the ideal of what we would want to live in eternity, I believe that's what would be the Christian notion of the physical experience of eternal life would be. The other dimension is the spiritual dimension, the judgment dimension. What does it mean for Christ to return and to judge us? Well, I think it means that time will come to an end, and we will be at the threshold of that eternal dimension. So this kind of experience will cease. And the 25th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew presents it very dramatically, that Christ will come and he will separate us as sheep from goats. And the sheep on the one side, the goats on the other. And he will say to the sheep, "For I was hungry and you gave me drink, and I was thirsty and you gave me to eat." And they will say, "But Lord, when did we see you hungry and thirsty and feed and give you drink?" And he will say, "When you did it for the least." Now, the notion can be that it's this arbitrary thing, that we are who we are, and God is simply counting up the good deeds or the bad deeds. That's not the Christian notion. It's not this, it's as if we have our good deed bucket and our bad deed bucket, and the coins are being tossed in, and whichever one ends up heavier will determine our fate, and we just remain the same in the middle. The Christian notion is that there is a relevance to what we've done in our life, because what we've done in our life will determine the shape that we are in when we stand before the Lord. The shape of some will be upright. They will be the image and the likeness of God that the book of Genesis tells us we were made in. They will have grown in their resemblance of God through the good that they have done, through their generosity, through their selflessness, that the more they thought of others rather than themselves, the larger their hearts became and the more they resembled the Lord. Whereas for others, their decisions in life have distorted them, have impacted them, have twisted that likeness, that original likeness they had to God, into something else. It has shrunk their heart so that they stand before the Lord in a position unable to even stand to tolerate the brilliance of God's goodness. See, that's the difference. It's not God goes, well, your bucket's not full enough. No, God looks at us and says, you have become so twisted, so distorted, your heart is so shrunk, you don't have the capacity. Here I am, I'm offering you eternal life and salvation, but you don't want it. You've become incapable of receiving it. That's what that notion is. And so that separation is not an arbitrary thing that God will decide. In effect, it's already been decided. We've already become the sheep or the goats, and consequently, we go the way of the sheep or the goat.
Sorry. I wanted to just quickly add as I listened to my colleagues. Jewishly, we absolutely also have this idea that yes, there's a wonderful story about, and I can't remember the exact whole story, but there's a story about a woman who, in fact, after she dies, comes before God exactly for this divine judgment, and they weigh her good deeds and bad. I told that story a few years ago on Yom Kippur, which is the Jewish Day of Repentance. And that story, I think, is told with the intention that we ultimately have the ability, no matter what we do in our lives, the idea of sin might be defined as missing the mark rather than necessarily doing something so bad you can never come back from it. And there is the idea that true repentance is always available to us. We can always return. And again, that focuses on doing so during life. There is a Jewish tradition that teaches, and it's typically a classic rabbinic teaching. This would be the worldview of the rabbis, the sages, from the time of approximately 2,000 years ago and later on, that suggests that there is the philosophy of reward and punishment. So that is something that will become dominant as well. But yes, generally, that Mishnaic and Talmudic view I mentioned does in fact suggest that the ultimate day of judgment is when you die. But again, it's about what you've done here. It's not about earning points necessarily, depending on which tradition you look at. In some more traditional traditions, that is part of what you're working toward, as well as earning points to get to a better judgment at the end.
Thank you. Believe it or not, 25 minutes is over. In fact, 5 minutes more. We've been going 30 minutes. And unfortunately, I'm sorry we did not get to your question. We will have to end the session here. And I would like to thank Imam Mustafa and Dr. Markeski and Rabbi Harari for answering our questions. Thank you.
May God bless you and keep you. May his countenance shine upon you, etc. So may grant you peace. That becomes a ritual which takes place in the Jewish home, generally, traditionally Friday nights, when parents who are not necessarily of the line of priest, but parents bless their children with that very same blessing. All right? So while that blessing does maintain, I have to be clear on this. While that blessing is also part of the ritual in the synagogue at certain times, okay, where you do have members who were once priests will offer that blessing, but it's done as part of the liturgy. It is also done by parents in the context of the home who aren't of that. So you have this, these two institutions. Okay, that's what I wanted to mention about that. Let's look at slide 2, because that's just external. Let's look inside the synagogues. Inside the synagogues, what you're looking at in this slide, and that slide, forget the one in the top right for now, is you would generally, ideally, be facing east towards Jerusalem. And what you have here is the Ark, and you can see somewhat the Torah scrolls. Okay, so the Ark, which contains the Torah scrolls, would be in the front of the congregation. The Torah scrolls are removed. They're generally, the Ark is kept closed, as over here, and there's a nice Ark cover there. But the Ark would be kept closed, and it would be opened at certain times of the service. Certain times of the service, the Torah scrolls are taken out, and they would be read as part of the service. Here you have you have a picture of a Torah there. It would be at a place called the Bima, where it would be read from. Sometimes they were in front of congregation, sometimes they were in the middle, and those would be somewhat elevated. What's interesting is in rabbinic language, though, the person who would lead the services, and you see this in some ancient synagogues as well as some contemporary ones, would not be higher than anyone else, but would actually, the Hebrew word is yorei lifnei hateva, would go down before the Ark. It would actually be where the person leading services would be lowered. And not stand above everyone, but actually be lower than everyone slightly. And that would be associated with the humility of prayer and that association. So that's what the front of the synagogue would like. What we have there on, I guess it's my left, but you're right, is just an example of a large ornate synagogue. But again, some can be rooms and it really varies. That's just a nice large ornate synagogue. Okay, why don't we get to the next slide, please? Wonderful. So just some religious garb for the synagogue. Now, rabbis, we get the name clergy so you can take parsonage. But similarly, there's nothing, I was ordained, but that really just meant I gained the proper amount of knowledge in which I could serve as a rabbi. From the point of view of the state, I can do weddings. From the point of view of Judaism, you don't have to be a rabbi to do that. So while they may function in that setting, rabbis certainly can do, anyone in the congregation can do what the rabbi does. But a number of things associated in terms of garb for the synagogue, this would be worn by everyone in the synagogue if they choose. One, the tradition of head covering. Okay, in most congregations now, men, often the women also, are wearing various forms of head covering, kippot. And you have just examples of that. Here you have an example of a woman. Also, you see the kippah. That's also more recent. That's been done, but that's been done. Now, primarily what we have are some pictures here of the talit. So I brought one, so we could actually see it. Many of you have seen this, of course, but I brought my daily talit, which means the top is a little bit getting worn. A few stains happens over the years. But this is worn as part of the service. The key part of it is you'll notice the little strings on each side. It's a four-cornered garment based on a reading in the book of Numbers, the fourth book of the Bible. It becomes associated with prayer. This actually used to have Hebrew writing on it. It's just faded over the years. It doesn't have to be. Some people have them fancier, embroidered or not. You'll see some people wearing smaller ones. I like to wear traditionally a somewhat large one. I even have a larger one. And you'll notice also often a tradition of stripes. Sometimes they'll be in white, sometimes they'll be in blue, sometimes they'll be in black. So for services, this would be worn, and it would be basically put on like this, a blessing recited, wrapped around, and then worn during services like this. And that's how it would be worn during services. You have something, a special garment in which one is using for prayer. There's a lovely poem by the Israeli, essentially secular poet in many ways, although it's hard to use that term, Yehuda Amichai. And he describes the putting on of the talit. All right? And he writes as follows. It's a lovely image. I'll just read it to you. Whoever put on a talit when he was young will never forget. Taking it out of the soft velvet bag, opening the folded shawl, spreading it out, kissing the length of the neckband embroidered or trimmed in gold, then swinging it in a great swoop overhead like a sky, a wedding canopy, a parachute, and then winding it around his head as in hide and seek, wrapping his whole body in it, and close and slow, snuggling into it like the cocoon of a butterfly, then opening the would-be wings to fly. And why is the talit striped and not checkered black and white like a chessboard? Because squares are finite and hopeless. Stripes come from infinity, and to infinity they go like airport runways where angels land and take off. Whoever is put in a talit will never forget when he comes out of a swimming pool or the sea, he wraps himself in a large towel, spreads it out again over his head, and again snuggles into it close and slow, still shivering a little, and he laughs and blesses. All right, I mean, it's a wonderful poetic description, particularly that part about coming. I love the runway, angels landing on runways, but he's very playful, Amichai. But that sense of coming out of the water, right, and wrapping yourself, it's a wonderful description of the experience. Now, there is also a tradition during weekdays, not on the Sabbath or holidays, but during weekdays, to wear what's known as tefillin. The English word is phylacteries, which I have no idea what that means. Now, these would be worn. You have an example over here of someone wearing them, and you see on the arms and on the head. Okay, and contained within the boxes are handwritten parts by scribes, containing verses from the Torah, from the 5 books of Moses, where you have the command written that you should wear these things. Okay, it's from Deuteronomy chapter 6, you have Deuteronomy chapter 11, as well as a couple of other examples. So here you have an example of a man wearing them. Tefillin traditionally were not worn by women, but you have more women wearing them today. Still not a huge amount, but you have more women wearing them today. And again, these are this notion of that you're binding yourself and surrounding yourself with God between your eyes, and these words on your arm, and how they contribute to a sense of how they can be used for prayer. They would only be worn during morning prayers, M-O-R-N, and the talit would only generally be worn during morning prayers as well, M-O-R-N. And those prayers are longer than afternoon or evening prayers. And aside from the Torah scrolls, which again would be read during parts of service, and the talit and people being able to have prayer books, those would be the key elements. There's no other form of specific religious garb that would necessarily be worn as part of services. These would be the defining elements of it. As a synagogue gained notions of sanctity over time, then there were various laws associated with it on how it could be used. So it would be obviously used for services. The question which is raised in rabbinic literature is, can it be used to take a shortcut? All right, can you walk through a synagogue in order to get from point A to point B because it's shorter? All right, so the answer to that would be no. I mean, that the place begins to gain a certain sense of sanctity, so you're not going to walk through it purely to take a shortcut. All right, so you have elements associated with that. Then there come also certain issues. What if you have to sell a synagogue? Can it be sold? Does it have to be for another purpose? How does that play out? Those become technical issues, but they can become associated with this notion that a synagogue becomes a sacred space and has a certain level of sanctity, but not necessarily that the space is inherently sanctified, but based on its usage and what you're going to do there. Now, the issue, similarly, that was raised in terms of Islam is where were women when it came to participation in the synagogue? Over time, it seems that in the ancient synagogue, women participated as men, at least certainly in the congregation of being there. Over time, however, although according to the tradition it would have always been like this, there did develop the notion of the separation of men and women during prayer. It could be associated for a couple of things. One was to keep men and women separated so that one concentrates on prayer and not on the other. Secondly, an element that some people suggest that prayer should be about the individual and the community, but not about the individual and family and spouse. That prayer is the place of the individual confronting God in prayer. Prayer is the place where the community as an entity stands with God in prayer. But prayer is not necessarily the place of family. Meaning the old American adage, the family that prays together stays together. For traditional Jewish tradition would be the family that the family doesn't pray together and still stays together. Because there's something different about what's taking place and about what the consciousness is. And I'll just finish with this. Today, of course, many Orthodox congregations maintain a separation. Reform and conservative congregations do not, and it raises all sorts of issues. Plus, you have the balcony issue, or two people on the same floor, as of sometimes men in front, women in back, sometimes a divider down the middle. So they're beside each other, but not that notion of being in the back. But that certainly has become, and within Jewish tradition, really contemporary, the past 50 years, a sort of a breaking, defining point between Orthodox Jewish tradition and other movements. That the defining point became this separation of men and women. It's just that interesting that became the critical issue. Okay, stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Once again, I learned a great deal. I was always curious about many things. Okay, once again, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. We have staff walking around with papers and pencils. Fill them out. Try to keep it related to the topic today. And then when you're completed it, go ahead, raise your hand again, and we'll collect it.